When does grace quit? We're talking about grace changes things. When does grace stop? When is it cut off? We're done with grace. When does it stop? I want us to think about that because this is an important thing to know and think about God's grace. You know, I think about people in the emergency room trying to save a life, working, bringing out all the stops, bringing in whatever it takes to keep going. And that's God's desire, his drive. When somebody comes in, it's not like there's somebody in room 1 there and they're having a heart attack, but I need to finish my donut and my coffee. I'm going to kind of lean back a little bit. I'm resting now. And so have room 1, tell him just to wait a little bit on his heart attack while I finish my donut and coffee. Then I'll mosey over there and we'll see what we can do. And by the way, I have a lunch meeting in 20 minutes, so we better wrap this up, okay? That's not what we expect in the emergency room. We want grace. We want that energy, that effort today. There's somebody in there, jump up, whatever, throw the donut and coffee down. We're going in and we're going to take care of this person who has a need with urgency and diligence and not stopping till we bring them through. What is God's grace like? What is his grace like? See, we are people who a lot of times have our patience tested, and we go back and forth with people who keep turning away from what is right. They keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's wearying, and it's tiresome, and we get worn out, and we're like, yeah, whatever. Stay in the emergency room, room number 1. Somebody will get to you, but I'm done. But is God's grace like that? The God who wants to bring us in, as was just read from John chapter 1, to let us be the children of God. God's grace watching us, knowing the things that have happened and have gone on, but he wants us. His grace is there because you know what? That's just who he is. And that's an important thing to know about God. God's grace isn't something that he invented. I probably ought to have grace with these people, so I'm going to have some strategies for grace. I'm going to try to play some mind tricks to get myself motivated to have grace on these people. Maybe that's how we are, where there's some people we feel like we're supposed to be nice to. I'm supposed to say kind things to. Okay, how am I going to do it today? How am I going to get up to get my mind around, got to show grace today? God is not like that. God is already there. He is there when he sees our need, and he's already jumping up, and he's already running to our need, running to our problem, running to our solution, reaching out his arms because that's who he is. He's not following a rule book on how to respond to sin. God is the God whose heart motivates him to reach out, to rush in, to help out those who are in need of grace, because that's who he is. And we see him crying out with a broken heart. If you look in Matthew, Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, and the disciples they're clueless, generally, most of the time, his disciples, as we tend to be. We get excited about little things and big things and the wrong things, and his disciples are like that. They're coming into town, they're looking how beautiful the city is. Jesus looks over the city as he comes into Jerusalem. He's going to die soon. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered you, your children, together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. How I wish I could get you to come in out of the rain. I wish I could get you to come in out of your sin. I wish I could get you to start paying attention again. I wish I could, but you weren't willing. and his heart is broken. See, your city is left to you desolate. Because he knows in just a few decades that this whole city is going to be destroyed. The temple is going to be burned. Everything that these people are relying on that are indicating they have a good spiritual life is going to be gone. And he's saying, if only you'd come to me. If only you would come to me. And I know, back to the medical analogy, there are some things that maybe people in here are stubbornly ignoring. Stubbornly ignoring some health issues, some heart issues, some diet issues, some things that you're just saying, oh, whatever. And then somebody says, come to the doctor. I want to help you. I see what's going on. And I've seen your blood pressure going up. I've seen whatever it is that the doctor's wanting to deal with. You're like, no, I don't need it. And Jesus is going something deeper, something spiritual, something in the depths of their souls. He says, I want to protect you because of his grace. He sees them in their stubborn rebellion. And it breaks his heart because he has a heart of grace. That is who he is when he sees the need. His desire, as we read in John chapter 1, he said, I want you to be the children of my Father. And later on when he says, don't worry, I'm going to go prepare a place for you. And the Father wants you there. I want you there. I want you to come into where it's safe. I want you to have hope. I want you to have help because God's grace is so a part of his character that he's jumping up saying, come on in. Come on in. Come on in. But they refused. Maybe you refuse. Maybe there's something more than health that's going on in your life. There's something spiritual. And the grace of God is there, but you don't want it. You don't want to change. You don't want to face it. But the grace of God is there because that's who he is. And the problem isn't that God's grace has quit. The problem is you're holding back. God's grace isn't quitting here. Because see, Jesus is coming in and he sees these people. And these people that he's crying out over, I wish you'd come to me, are the very people that are going to turn and say, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. The rejection is real. The spitting on him is real. The whips coming down are real. The blood flowing is real. The crown of thorns is real. The people making fun of him, they're real. And he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Grace doesn't quit, even in the face of rebellion, even when the blood and the spit is on his face. How I long to gather you. That's what grace is. It's who God is. It's who Jesus is. They're ready to jump up in our moment of need. And we stubbornly refuse too many times to let his grace heal me. God's grace doesn't quit. We quit on his grace. We say, I'm not worthy. Well, yeah, but he doesn't care. His love is for you. Wherever you've been, whatever you've done, his love is still for you. But if you don't come under his wings for his protection, you're going to suffer the consequences of your sin. But if you come to him, he says, I love you and I want to forgive you. That's the grace. That's always his grace. Because his love is for you. It's always for you. His grace doesn't quit. He shows his love for us, Romans chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. When somebody is passed out by the road and then the ambulance comes and sees somebody in need, they get them and they get them help. They respond. The first responders respond to people who aren't able to ask for help or call for help. While we're still sinners, that's the grace of God. He shows up and he jumps into action, and Jesus died for us. He jumped into action so that we might be saved. That's the grace of God. We've got to embrace God's grace, because sometimes we feel like it's not for me. His help, no, don't worry about me. Don't help me. He's like, but that's what I do. The grace of God is who he is. There's no law that requires him to have mercy or grace. It's just in his nature. That's how he introduced himself to Moses. Full of mercy and steadfast love to generation after generation, deeply wanting to bless you. If only you'd come in out of the rain and into my protection. If only you'd come. If only you'd let him change you. If only you let him help you. If only you let him save you, not only in forgiveness, but in transformation of your mind and your thoughts. If only you let him have the purpose and focus of your life to live for him, because his grace doesn't quit. And we are invited to the same sort of grace. When Jesus says things like, forgive as you have been forgiven, he's saying, let me tell you about my grace. My grace is so powerful that needs to be who we are. We need to go from being sinners who Jesus died for to people who love someone enough to reach out when they're in the ditch. Love someone enough when they are hurting and help us. We need to not be the Christians who are sitting there. There's a soul in room number 1, but you want to finish something first. There's not an urgency in our hearts sometimes for the lost soul that is the urgency that's in Jesus' heart. And so when we talk about grace and we see that his grace doesn't quit, we start looking at us. Does my grace quit? Do I have a sort of grace that quits where I get mildly interested, but then bored or tired or frustrated? So I just say, you just sit in room number 1 for a while because, I've got things to do. I've got things that are more important than your soul. When we see God's grace isn't quitting, and if we are reflecting God, grace changes things, like Paul said, the grace was not without effect. I worked harder than the rest of them, but it was really the grace in me because I really realized and recognized that God's grace is powerful and it's consistent, and I can't help but jump up and finish the job. I'm not clocking out in the spiritual warfare that's going on in other people's lives. I'm not sitting down and saying, okay, I'm done, because God doesn't do that. And when we learn from his grace, we will have the sort of grace that's ready to lay it down for people who have needs and who are hurting. Does your grace quit? Because God's doesn't. What could hold us back from showing God's grace? Well, in John chapter 3, 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Well, what's the deal? If God's doing this, his grace is so big that he's preemptively doing something and taking action. Well, he says, what about your heart? We look later in, I'm sorry, I skipped one. I skipped to the next verse. Back in John 1, we'll get to John 3 in a moment. The true light which gives light to everyone is coming into the world. He was in the world was made through him. The world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. The light is there. Are you born of God? Or are you part of the people that don't receive the grace of God? Sorry, I got one slide ahead. This is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and the people love the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. When we are the people who quit, God's grace hasn't quit, but we maybe have decided it's too much. He wants us to be born as children of God, who live with the grace of God, that extend the grace of God, but maybe there's something else that we would prefer that's not the grace of God for others. We don't recognize or know the darkness that is selfishness that comes in us. Now, when I say this, I don't want anyone to go on a guilt trip. Oh, I'm bad. Well, Jesus died while we're still sinners, so he knows who we are. I'm not here saying this so that we just feel bad. I'm here to say this so that we can lift up our eyes to the light and say, I want to do that. And instead of focusing on feeling guilty and feeling bad, let's lift up our eyes to our Father and say, teach me how to live with grace and show grace. And there's no point in feeling bad about what you failed at. There's only a point in looking up and learn how to succeed at being God's people, as living God's children and showing God's grace. We don't want to spend the time looking at where we failed. We need to look up to where we're going to succeed. The thing is, do you love the light and you want to come in the light and you want to walk in the light? Do you want to learn the ways of God? Do you want to learn the grace that doesn't stop? Don't spend time wallowing in guilt. Spend prayer, offering yourself to the victory of God, where you can share the grace that doesn't quit. Maybe if you think of a time or a person or a relationship that you have turned off the grace and you say, God, can you help me have the grace for them again? Can you shine the light through me again? We need to turn towards what God has called us to so that we have the sort of grace that doesn't stop. And that's what we need to do. Don't spend time with guilt. Spend time turning into the light, walking in the light, and living as the children of God, the God whose grace doesn't quit, so we can be the people whose grace doesn't quit. So where are you? Where have you quit showing grace? And ask God to light that fire again. Shine that light again through you. Are you ready to be available with God's grace? Have you even come to God? Have you given your life to Him? He gave everything for you. He keeps pouring it out for you and blessing you and calling you into His protection. But have you come under His wings? Have you decided you're going to live for Him and in His name, with His power, with His purpose? Being baptized in the name of Jesus is where we say, okay, I'm not following you, but now I'm ready to start. I'm all in because I know God's all in. Have you done that? We've had so many that have done that recently. But if you're ready to do that, we can do that now. But if you realize that you have just kind of quit offering grace, and you need God to teach you how to be a first responder of grace that doesn't quit until the soul is safe, we need to pray about that. If you got something in your life that's holding you back from being that kind of person, we can pray together. And if you'd like to pray this morning, please come down when we stand and we sing this next song.
Would you be free from the burden